Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Given that this little thing had resolved a big trouble for him, Lin Li was too embarrassed to be stingy and threw a level 15 magical crystal towards it. Xiaohua caught the magical crystal and started munching on it by Lin Li's side. Mage Felix, since the green dragons had left, do you think we should continue exploring the dragon's den? Chief Elder Randy walked towards Lin Li, and, surprisingly, asked Lin Li for his opinion. This wasn't just Chief Elder Randy's idea. The others stared at Lin Li too, as nobody knew where the green dragons had gone and what this young legendary mage was planning to do. At least for now, they had to show some respect to Lin Li in order not to get attacked by the green dragons. "Oh, let's go then," replied Lin Li unbotheredly as he walked deeper into the dragon's den. This wasn't because he got more arrogant after what had happened, but rather because he was only focused on Xiaohua. After the conversation between Xiaohua and the Green Dragon King, Lin Li was extremely curious about what this little thing had said to the Green Dragon King that made it get out of its den together with all the other dragons. Upon hearing Lin Li's reply, Chief Elder Randy's eyes flashed a tinge of joy. He waved at Princess Alun and his subordinates, and followed the Tower of Dusk into the dragon's den. Cheyenne from the Manhwa family was far less happy, but had very complicated emotions now. Given the relationship between the Manhwa family and Dark Blade, the Manhwa family was at a disadvantage since the three chiefs of the Dark Blade had reached the legendary realm. What he had thought of during the time of despair just now was probably the best way for the two factions to return to an equilibrium. Unfortunately, this dream had been shattered again. Now, he could only hope that the immortal king's treasure could resolve the Manhwa family's crisis. Thinking of this, Cheyenne shook his head and hurried to catch up with the team. Seeing that Lin Li was talking quietly to that unknown organism, Cheyenne couldn't help but sigh. Was there anything that this youngster that had appeared out of nowhere couldn't do? At least the Manhwa family had one advantage over the Dark Blade: they had allied with this youngster a long time ago. "Hey! What were you talking to it about?" Of course, Lin Li wouldn't be bothered what others thought, and continuously questioned Xiaohua about what it had said to the Green Dragon King while walking into the dragon's den. However, Xiaohua's reply was just it shaking its head, refusing to reveal anything. "Damn it! If I don't show you what I can do, you'll probably turn the sky around." Thinking of this, Lin Li made up his mind and clenched his teeth. He took out a level 15 magical crystal and waved it at Xiaohua. He said, "Are you telling me or not? If you tell me, this crystal is yours." The baby elemental Wyrm was like a drunkard who had just seen good wine. In a flash, this little thing had already pounced towards the magical crystal without caring about anything. However, Lin Li tightened his grip and concealed the magical crystal in his palm. He sneered at the stunned Xiaohua and said, "I'll only give you if you tell me." "Humph." Xiaohua let out a scornful sound and turned its head towards one side, not even looking at Lin Li's clenched fist that held the magical crystal. "Yo, you think it's too little? It's a level 15 magical crystal." Lin Li gritted his teeth and took out more magical crystals one by one. He continued to lure Xiaohua. "How about 2 crystals? 3? At most 4. Okay, 6. If you still don't want to tell me, I'm not interested to hear it anymore." 6 walnut-sized level 15 magical crystals piled up on Lin Li's palm. However, Xiaohua didn't give Lin Li any reply. In a flash, Xiaohua pounced onto the pile of magical crystals. When Lin Li reacted to it and clenched his fist in an attempt to hide the crystals, Xiaohua had already disappeared together with the crystals into Dream Garden. Not long afterward, Xiaohua came out of Dream Garden while munching on a half-eaten magical crystal. It still flew beside Lin Li, but it didn't even look at Lin Li, from whom it had just stolen 6 magical crystals from. Lin Li suppressed his heartache and continued to question Xiaohua. However, Xiaohua swallowed the last mouthful of magical crystal and looked at Lin Li with innocent eyes, signaling that it didn't know anything. Lin Li's heart ached. How many level 15 magical crystals had he used? Which bastard had made this dream garden ring? The one who wore it wasn't the master. Instead, the one who lived inside it was the true master. If not, Lin Li would have gotten back those magical crystals that Xiao Hua had carried into the ring. Lin Li's heart ached for the 6th level 15 magical crystals that had been used up without getting anything back. However, everyone around him, be it the elves or the Dark Blade, all looked at him with envy. Especially so for Chief Elder Randy. As a wild druid, he had to understand about his shapeshifted species well when turning to shapeshift. Chief Elder Randy's strongest shapeshifted form now was the Silver Wyrm. Thus, he knew a lot about the Wyrms. After escaping death narrowly, Chief Elder Randy had been pondering the origins of this seemingly insignificant little thing. The Green Dragon King was a creature approaching Sanctuary Realm, while this little thing was only level 15. How could it make the Green Dragon King lower its head? When he felt the slight menace of the dragon that came from this little thing, he noticed it was pure dragon menace, although its intensity couldn't be compared with that of the Green Dragon King. However, with his understanding of the Wyrms, he couldn't think of any Wyrm that would produce a descendant so small. Even Wyrm descendants whose bloodlines were very diluted would definitely have a massive and strong build. However, this little thing possessed menace of the dragon, but was only palm-sized and reached level 15. Yet, it was this little thing that had made the Green Dragon King lower its head. Chief Elder Randy thought that he knew Wyrms very well, but the more he thought about this little thing, the more puzzled he was. Not just Chief Elder Randy, the others were also guessing what this little thing was. However, none of them could think of anything despite being legendary powerhouses with great knowledge. There was one thing that they were certain about. No matter what that little thing was, something that could order the Green Dragon King around was definitely a valuable treasure. Everyone had experienced how terrifying the Green Dragon King was just now. Under the powerful dragon menace, even a legendary powerhouse found it difficult to lift up a finger. However, this little thing could easily make the Green Dragon King leave. If it wasn't a treasure, then what was? Even a Green Dragon King that was approaching the Sanctuary Realm had to obey this little thing's orders, so was there anything stronger than that? Looking at the baby elemental Wyrm flying beside Lin Li, it was impossible for those legendary powerhouses not to feel jealous. If they had such a treasure, would they even need to collaborate with other factions for this mission? If it could really order the Green Dragon King around, then. While these legendary powerhouses had their own thoughts, Lin Li felt gloomy about those 6 magical crystals. Without realizing it, the team had walked deep into the valley to the dragon's den. As all the green dragons had left with the Green Dragon King, the den seemed abnormally quiet at the moment. It was hard to imagine that such a place had once housed so many green dragons, and even the Green Dragon King. It seemed like a dream to be able to make it here alive. If it had been a nightmare earlier, their journey was so smooth now that it seemed unreal. When the team had reached the end of the den, they found nothing but an ancient teleportation portal. The stone platform that held the teleportation portal had been corroded throughout the ages, and the few surrounding stone pillars were also old and decaying. It made people doubt if this portal could even be activated. However, the appearance of this teleportation portal suddenly made the previously peaceful team very tense. Evidently, the Immortal King's treasure was very likely to be hidden behind this teleportation portal. Given the goal of each faction, no matter how harmonious they were on the way, it was time to consider their own interests now. A faint dragon menace radiated from Chief Elder Randy's body again. He seemed to be ready to shapeshift into a Wyrm any time and sweep everything in his way. Meanwhile, Princess Elune and the other 2 high-level elves also started accumulating their power, preparing to strike at any obstructor. The legendary sword Sage Baldella rubbed his dragonskin bracer and narrowed his eyes. He scanned everyone who wasn't from the Dark Blade, and his raging aura rose continuously like a dangerous wild beast's. Lansdale still put on a smile like an elegant royal. He caressed his mustache with one hand and held an elaborately decorated sword with another. Although one couldn't feel any killing intent from him, any obstructor would face a fatal blow from him. Legendary mage Borg and his son Stephen held their magic staves tightly. The gem at the tip of the magic staff of either one of them shone with brilliance, signaling that the magic prepared in it was definitely very powerful. The team didn't stop in their tracks. They just separated themselves into their respective factions, the elves, the Dark Blade, the Tower of Dusk, and the Manhwa family. Out of the 4 factions, Cheyenne was the weakest now. When they'd been outside, at least the Manhwa family still had hundreds of elite fighters above level 15. However, the Manhwa family couldn't even compare to the Tower of Dusk here. Facing the warning from the elves and the Dark Blade, Cheyenne finally decided to exit this competition first and slowed down his steps. However, Cheyenne wasn't the only one who chose not to participate. Lin Li and his 2 subordinates were walking very slowly, and weren't interested in the competition since the beginning. Thus, when the elves and the Dark Blade hastened their steps in excitement upon seeing the teleportation portal, Lin Li was left at the back of the team, the tense atmosphere concentrated between the elves and the Dark Blade. Suddenly, Chief Elder Randy stopped and looked at Borg. He said, according to the earlier agreement, we only want the lost sacred relic. If anyone breaks the agreement, we won't hesitate to start a war. Once Chief Elder Randy made his stance very clear, the atmosphere eased. Borg walked towards Chief Elder Randy and smiled. Don't worry, Chief Elder Randy, nobody will ruin our friendship with the elves. With this, the 4 from the Dark Blade hurried forward and stepped into the teleportation portal. Without anyone realizing, the conversation between Manhwa and the Green Dragon King had come to an end. Of course, it only looked like Manhwa roaring while waving its claws, and the Green Dragon King humming with much restraint to the outsiders. With a roar from Manhwa, the green dragons behind the Green Dragon King suddenly moved. Everyone got tense, fearing that Mage Felix would order those green dragons to kill them like they had thought. However, they felt relieved shortly afterward. The green dragons led by the Green Dragon King didn't even look at the people. They flew past the crowd directly and out of the valley to an unknown destination. After the Green Dragon King had left, the suffocating menace of the dragon gradually dispersed. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief and realized that sweat had drenched their clothes unknowingly. After witnessing such a sight, everyone had complicated feelings towards Lin Li, who had rescued all of them again, and didn't know how to react. This young legendary mage had only reached level 21. However, be it the elves or the Dark Blade, none of their legendary mages dared to underestimate him. Although this young mage had a lower level compared to many of the legendary mages, he was the one who had driven the Green Dragon King out of the den. No matter what he had used to achieve that, it was his capability that had done so. Even Steven, who had always wanted to take revenge on Lin Li, could only clench his fist and didn't dare to show any sign of animosity. During this journey, he didn't at all reveal his hatred for Lin Li whenever he saw him. However, now he knew that he was still far too weak to revenge. After the Green Dragon King had led the green dragons away, the Dragon of Dreams projected avatar returned into Manhwa's body. Manhwa chirped happily and flew towards Lin Li in a flash. It used its tiny claws to point at its mouth, asking for a reward for what it had done. Borg put a few magical crystals into the magic nodes and activated the teleportation portal. With a flash, the 4 people disappeared from the teleportation portal, and only left the few magical crystals that had exhausted their mana. Undoubtedly, there was only one immortal king's treasure. Although the first person to go in wouldn't get all the items in the treasure, he definitely had the advantage of choosing first. The Dark Blade could share this treasure with the other factions, but it didn't mean that they would give up all the advantages, not even to the elves. After all, only the elves themselves knew if they were really here for the lost sacred relic. Although people wouldn't be stingy with compliments whenever they mentioned the elves, which intelligent race would really be straightforward in their thinking? Even if there was one, it would probably be already long extinct in this cruel world. Thus, the Dark Blade changed their attitude of keeping a low profile, and didn't hesitate to turn hostile to the elves when faced with the problem of who was to enter the immortal king's treasury first. Chief Elder Randy contemplated for a while, and turned to look at Cheyenne, who was walking over slowly. He said to Princess Alun, "Princess, let's go." With that, the elves team stepped into the teleportation portal. When Lin Li and Cheyenne arrived at the teleportation portal, the Dark Blade and the elves had already left. Cheyenne hesitated for a second before turning to Lin Li. He said, "Let's go, Mage Felic." No matter what, the Tower of Dusk and the Manhwa family were the first to form an alliance with each other out of all the factions on this mission. Now, although Cheyenne was anxious to enter the Immortal King's treasure hideout, he didn't forget about his ally, the Tower of Dusk. Lin Li shook his head, and replied, "See you later." Cheyenne was stunned by Lin Li's reply. But thinking about it, although the two factions were allies, they were still not a single entity, after all, and nobody knew what would happen after the teleportation. Thus, it was normal for Lin Li to be holding back something. Cheyenne nodded and stepped into the teleportation portal. Like the others before him, he placed a few magical crystals in the nodes and activated the portal. After everyone had left through the teleportation portal, only Lin Li and his two undead subordinates remained in the dragon's den now. However, Lin Li didn't enter the Immortal King's treasure hideout directly via the teleportation portal. Instead, he turned back towards where they had come from. What was the hurry with the Immortal King's treasure? Osric's underground palace in the Dragon Mountains already had so many fatal traps. Would the Immortal King's treasure be so easy to reach? Although Lin Li wanted to get Thunderbolt as soon as possible, it was better to let others clear the minefield for him. Of course, he didn't turn back just because he wanted to avoid those traps waiting for them at the other end of the teleportation portal. In the vast and empty den, Lin Li's footsteps sounded very clearly as he walked back. The two subordinates followed Lin Li silently at the back. Neither of them asked why he chose to turn back. To them, there was a reason behind every decision their master made. They just had to follow. However, Uchfalusi turned to look at Norfeller from time to time, feeling rather bitter. Until today, Uchfalusi, who was at the peak of level 20, was considered Lin Li's prime assistant. Meanwhile, Vampire Norfeller was only level 19, and hadn't even reached the legendary realm. However, how long had it been? With the blood from 3 green dragons, Norfeller's power shot up to level 21 and left Uchfalusi far behind. Although he didn't mean to fight for Master's favor. Uchfalusi couldn't help feeling sad given that Norfeller, who had been much weaker than him, had now gotten ahead of him by so much. Unfortunately, Lich Uchfalusi wasn't a vampire. Thus, he couldn't increase his power in the same way as Norfeller. After Lin Li walked for a few minutes, he reached a fork. Without much hesitation, Lin Li chose the path that seemed to be rarely trodden and walked in that direction. The dragon den nested so many green dragons and even the green dragon king. The area inside was large beyond imagination. Even with Lin Li's walking speed of a legendary mage, he still walked for over 10 minutes before arriving at an extremely dark and vast area. Although the dragon den was still filled with strong dragon menace even after the green dragon king had left with the green dragons, the dragon menace was even stronger where Lin Li was now. In addition to the intense dragon menace, there was also strong death aura here, giving people chills that ran deep down their souls. Even undead creatures like Norfeller and Uchfalusi seemed unable to resist such powerful death aura, and their bodies trembled uncontrollably as a result. After he took in everything clearly, even Lin Li, who had been through so much, couldn't help but marvel at what he saw. The entire area was extremely vast, making one feel that they were in another world altogether. The dragon den was already huge, but standing here, Lin Li felt like his existence was as insignificant as an ant. What really made Lin Li's scalp tingle was the WYRM skeletons lying all around the area and the WYRMS magical crystals that shone with tempting brilliance. From that, Lin Li finally realized that he had entered the legendary dragon graveyard, the home for all WYRMS after they had died. Lin Li didn't expect to find such a legendary place in the Green Dragon Denver. When the 4 factions team had arrived at this fork, Xiaohua, who was enjoying its magical crystals in the Dream Garden ring, had alerted Lin Li through the connection he had with Dream Garden. However, he hadn't thought that the end of this path would be something as magnificent as this. Although the baby elemental WYRM couldn't communicate with humans using the common language, Dream Garden provided the landlord and tenant with a spiritual connection. This spiritual communication couldn't express ideas with much clarity, but Lin Li and Xiaohua had already developed some mutual unspoken understanding after the period they had interacted with each other. However, back when Xiaohua had alerted Lin Li, he thought that Xiaohua was telling him to snatch the Green Dragon King's treasures. After all, most legends included the story of dragons liking to collect shiny objects. As the king of dragons, the Green Dragon King should have a generous collection too. Although Lin Li wasn't too interested in treasures, it was a crime not to take a treasure that was put right into his hands. Moreover, Xiaohua was the one who had alerted him, so he didn't have to share it with anybody else. Thus, Lin Li hadn't revealed anything earlier, and continued towards the teleportation portal with the rest of the team. After all, those people wouldn't be able to get the immortal king's treasure in a short time. After everyone had left via the teleportation portal, it was the perfect time for Lin Li to head back and retrieve the treasure that Xiaohua had alerted him about. However, Lin Li didn't at all expect Xiaohua to bring him to the dragon graveyard. Those WYRM skeletons, those shiny WYRMS magical crystals. Lin Li couldn't help mumbling in his heart, if the Green Dragon King knew that this little thing had brought him to dig their graveyard, would it still leave so easily? No matter what legends said, nothing could compare to the real thing. Lin Li stared at the dragon graveyard and exclaimed. He had heard about the ancient WYRMS dragon graveyard before. It was said that the dragon graveyard was hidden in the endless time and space. Every dead ancient WYRM would concentrate all its spirit into the dragon's soul and enter the dragon graveyard. However, the ancient WYRMS dragon graveyard was clearly not so easy to find. Even if he had found it, he would face the attacks from countless powerful dragon souls. As the descendants of the ancient WYRMS, the WYRMS seemed to have inherited such a tradition. However, they didn't have the right to enter the dragon graveyard hidden in endless time and space. Thus, they built a place where they could rest in the last stage of their lives. Although WYRMS were extremely long-lived and possessed impressive power, they still couldn't escape aging and death eventually. In order to rest in peace after their death, every WYRM would return to this dragon graveyard when they felt that their lives were reaching an end, and would await their last moments quietly here. Nobody knew whether the significance of the dragon graveyard was just for them to rest in peace after their death. However, each dragon graveyard certainly buried countless WYRMS that used to be extremely powerful. Although this dragon graveyard was only one for the green dragons which ranked the lowest out of all WYRMS, they were still WYRMS, after all, and the shock it brought Lin Li was still significant. Lin Li finally managed to suppress his excitement with much effort, and his eyes cautiously swept the WYRM skeletons. He could tell that this dragon graveyard wasn't too old. It was likely formed at the end of the Dark Age. Judging from the time, it was probably only 1,300 years old, and not many WYRMS had rested here. However, any WYRM skeleton or magical crystal could be considered a rare treasure, not to mention so many of them here. The WYRMS magical crystals hanging in the middle of the skeletons shone alluring brilliance and radiated strong mana waves. Lin Li uncontrollably caressed the dream garden ring on his finger. Evidently, that greedy little thing had smelled the scent of WYRMS magical crystals. That was why it had prompted Lin Li to come here. When Lin Li was observing the dragon graveyard, his undead creatures were just as astonished. The vampire Norfeller had it better. Ever since he'd broken though to level 21, he had been focusing all of his energy on analyzing the soul inheritance of vampires to let himself quickly exhibit power that was equal to his power level. However, Uchfalusi could not stay calm, and there seemed to be massive waves crashing against his heart. He stared widely at the sight before him, and his eyes seemed to almost fall out. To a lich, what could be more wonderful than entering a dragon graveyard? Liches were best at producing undead creatures, and intact dragon skeletons were absolutely the perfect material for it. Any dragon skeleton could be used to create a strong skeletal WYRM. In this space full of death aura, there would also be souls of dead dragons. Those might not be useful to others, but for a lich, it was the best material needed for creating powerful undead. However, regardless of how agitated he was, Uchvalusi dared not move at all. Lin Li, too, did not dare to move, and had no choice but to stand quietly in the cave and observe everything in the graveyard. If it had been anyone else, they would have barged in without hesitation already just for the sake of the legendary dragon crystals. Well, it was just a bunch of dead dragons, which weren't too dangerous. To many people, the reason why the dragon graveyard was so mysterious and horrible was that the existence of the dragon graveyard often meant that there were groups of dragons guarding it. Without the guardian dragons, everything would be free for grabs. However, Lin Li was well aware that the terror of the dragon's graveyard extended far beyond the guardian dragons. The greater horror was actually present in the graveyards, where draulics ran rampant. In Amril, few people might know what a draulic was because not all had the opportunity to enter dragon graveyards. After all, the groups of guardian dragons were terrifying enough to completely block all intruders. Therefore, in the legends about the dragon graveyards, people only focused on the countless dragon skeletons and the tempting legendary magical crystals, yet they were clueless about the existence of the draulics. However, Lin Li did not just have basic knowledge about the draulics, but was in fact rather familiar with them. Although it was his first time entering a dragon graveyard in Amril, he had a deep memory from the dragon graveyard that he'd visited in the Endless World. That happened when Lin Li was preparing to challenge the Dragon of Destruction. After carefully studying the information about the Dragon of Destruction, Lin Li took the risk and ventured into a dragon graveyard in order to find a way to escape from the Dragon of Destruction's affinity spells, Doom. Back then, his agenda was not to find treasure, but to find the skeletons and dragon souls of the former companion of the Dragon of Destruction. It was in that dragon graveyard that Lin Li encountered a terrifying and intimidating draulic for the first time in his life. It was a tough and tedious battle which never failed to give Lin Li the thrills even now when he remembered it, though it took place only in the virtual in-game world. Not to mention in the world of Amril, even in the Endless World, no one would know better than Lin Li how horrifying a draulic was. Although they were both dead dragons, the draulic was worlds apart from the humorous Wyrm. It was akin to comparing a human lich to a skeletal warrior of the lowest level. Any dragon skeleton could be transformed into a humorous Wyrm as long as it was still complete. However, only the strongest and most powerful Wyrms could be transformed into a draulic after death. Besides, the humorous Wyrm could only be created successfully with external help. After the transformation, it would have nothing to do with its previous incarnation, and all of its pride and memories of the previous lifetime would vanish. However, a draulic relied on its own powerful strength to forcibly let its dead self continue staying in this world, either shouldering unfinished duties or possessing remaining grievances. As the dead, draulics lingered in the world of the living. However, they had not completely broken out of the shackles of the death energy. Regardless of how powerful they were, they could never leave the dragon graveyards. Hence, draulics could be considered the best gravekeepers of dragon graveyards. Standing by the entrance, Lin Li began to hesitate a little. Although the treasure was right in front of him, it might be risky, and even deadly to retrieve it. Although it was the graveyard of the green dragons, and the green dragons were the weakest dragons, it had a history of 1,300 years. God knew how old and how powerful a Wyrm which had transformed into a draulic truly was. Lich knew that there was a huge difference between draulics and liches formed from humans even though they were both liches. The human lich was a dead person who completely transformed himself into an undead creature. Although they could move about freely and stay unharmed even when exposed to sunlight, they would never fully inherit the power of their previous living self even if the preparations were complete and the transformation method was perfect. Therefore, when a human became a lich for the first time, they would all be very fragile. However, such experiences of the human liches could not be applied to the draulics at all. Although the draulic was constrained by the death energy and forever imprisoned in a dragon graveyard, during transformation, it'd inherit all the powers it had possessed before death. The strength of the Green Dragon King was already approaching the sanctuary realm, hence, the draulic of this graveyard would definitely be powerful too. A period of more than 1,300 years was neither long nor short. Even if the Lich only had the legendary realm strength of ordinary green dragons after transformation, it could still increase his strength by continuously absorbing the death energy in the dragon graveyard. Lin Li dared not imagine to what extent the Lich would have grown in the past 1,300 years. Lin Li did not forget that the draulic he'd encountered back then had power of the sanctuary realm. Even if the draulic had yet to reach the sanctuary realm, it was probably not much worse than the Green Dragon King. Lin Li had just experienced the horror of the Green Dragon King back outside. The difference in power was truly despair-inducing. However, Lin Li could not bear to leave just like that. Putting the dragon skeleton and the legendary dragon crystals aside, the benefits to gain in this dragon graveyard went far beyond that. In particular, Lin Li also knew that there was an extremely precious herb that could only be found in places like dragon graveyards. Now that the massive advantages and danger were juxtaposed with each other, Lin Li was stuck in a dilemma as to whether he should take the risk or not. It was a pity that after the transformation, the draulic would have lost its imprint. Perhaps even the projected avatar of the Dragon of Dream would not be able to do anything to it. More atrociously, the draulic was confined to the graveyard, thus leaving Lin Li with no chance to even invade by luring it away. Lin Li frowned and thought about the countermeasures he could employ. He was unwilling to leave a treasure cave empty-handed because it was not like him to do so. Stroking his chin, Lin Li thought about the draulic he'd once encountered, and realized that although the Lich's strength had already reached the sanctuary realm, it had had its weaknesses too. He reckoned that its biggest weakness should have been the lack of detection abilities. Generally speaking, a draulic was imprisoned in the graveyard with nothing much to entertain itself with. Hence, the only thing it could do was sleep. Slumber combined with the lack of acute senses would give Lin Li a possible chance of sneaking in and leaving quietly, as long as he was careful and refrained from making big movements. After instructing his undead servants to be careful, Lin Li walked into the dragon graveyard, making his footsteps as light as possible. He ignored the dragon skeletons as well as the legendary dragon crystals. Instead, he searched carefully along the edge of the graveyard. The graveyard was massive, but Lin Li fortunately also knew the exact environmental requirements for the growth of the herb. Although he could only search slowly, his efforts were not futile. It didn't take long for Lin Li to find a dragon's head that was half buried in the ground near him. There was a shoot of grass that emitted a faint glow in the eye socket of the dragon's head. Lin Li could not contain his joy when he saw the unassuming shoot of grass. It seemed that the experience he'd gained in the endless world was very useful. He gently got through the dragon's eye socket, carefully dug out the small shoot of grass, and placed it inside his ring. He then finally heaved a sigh of relief. That was the dragon soul herb, which Lin Li valued more than the dragon skeletons and crystals. No one in Amril knew how useful the dragon soul herb was. Of course, it might well be that most of them had no idea that it even existed. However, Lin Li had memories from his time in the endless world, hence, he knew that the grass that contained the condensed dragon spirit and essence was more precious than the black lotus. Hence, it could be considered an absolute treasure. In Lin Li's memory alone, there were at least 5 top-grade guru-level potion formulas which required the dragon soul herb. Of course, in Amril, the value of the dragon soul herb would probably be maximized only in the hands of Lin Li. Now that Lin Li had gained experience on how to infiltrate the graveyard safely, he did not waste too much time, though he still made sure to be very careful. In no time, he found several dragon soul herbs, which was a huge gain for Lin Li. They might be useless in the hands of others, but when in Lin Li's hands, they might very likely be the key to his promotion to a divine smith. Although the venture was very rewarding, Lin Li dared not explore the center of the graveyard. He knew that while there were higher quality dragon soul herbs there were probably also draulics hibernating nearby. Although the death aura spread through the entire dragon graveyard, it was stronger closer to the epicenter. Since the draulic was on its own territory, it would obviously sleep wherever it was comfortable. After obtaining the dragon soul herb, he returned to the dragon graveyard and stared at the dragon skeletons and crystals in front of him. They made him begin to hesitate. He could be careful and gentle with picking herbs, and he reckoned that nothing should go wrong if he were to be careful despite the fact that the dragon skeletons and crystals were large. Most importantly, he could do his best to avoid the epicenter. Anyway, the skeletons and magical crystals around the area were at least of the legendary level, and even if they were only level 20, they were still treasures. After making up his mind, Lin Li got ready to continue scouring carefully. However, Uchvalusi began stuttering at this moment. Master, I need your permission for something, and I also need your help. Uchvalusi then waited for his reply. Actually, the last thing a servant should do was to trouble his master. However, he needed help for something that he could not manage on his own. Lin Li glanced at the many dragon skeletons in the dragon graveyard, seemingly having understood Uchvalusi's intentions. The humorous WYRM was the most important component that decided the strength of a lich, in addition to its own level. The reason why a legendary realm lich was terrifying to others was that facing a legendary lich meant facing a legendary humorous WYRM. Therefore, the real strength of a lich should be derived from himself and the humorous WYRM that he had summoned. Uchvalusi probably wanted some skeletons of WYRMs in order to strengthen his body. What's the matter? Do you want to change Crimson's body? Don't look at these skeletons anymore. Aren't there still those green dragons that Norfeller had sucked dry? They may not be alive anymore, but the bodies are still complete. At least, it could help increase your Crimson's abilities by at least half a level. It's much more durable and useful compared to these skeletons. Of course, it was not that Lin Li could not bear to lose the skeletons, but rather that he wanted to give Uchvalusi a better suggestion. Lin Li had initially heeded Kanora's suggestion and used the corpse of the Crimson Dragon that he had obtained from the underground palace to reshape his humorous WYRM, which now was much stronger than before. Although it could not compare to an actual WYRM of the same level, there was definitely a huge difference. The humorous WYRM summoned by Uchvalusi inherited a powerful dragon crystal, which was much stronger than Lin Li's humorous WYRMs. If it were to be reshaped by the complete corpse of the WYRM, there would definitely be a great improvement in strength. An increase by half a level would be an understatement. Uchvalusi had always been envious of Lin Li's Crimson Dragon, but WYRMs were hard to find in this world. The Lich was naturally thrilled to hear Lin Li's promise. If the humorous WYRM had flesh, it would really deserve to be called a WYRM. However, that was not what Uchvalusi wanted. After some hesitation, he said, "Master, I was referring to something else, it's about my own power." Uchvalusi was now at the peak of level 20. To put it nicely, he was a step away from level 21. However, he might never reach level 21 if he did not find a way to break through the bottleneck. Although he managed to return to the legendary realm based on his current experience, it would be much harder to advance further. Lin Li was aware of Uchvalusi's situation too. However, he did not research or have much knowledge about necromagic, hence, he could not come up with a solution. Although he had had quite a few conversations with Sendros before, Uchvalusi had yet to encounter such a problem at that time. Besides, most of those conversations had consisted of him answering Sendros' questions about pharmaceutics and addressing some rumors about Anril. When Uchvalusi returned to the legendary realm and hit the plateau, Lin Li did not have the time to go to the Darkness Shrine to look for Sendros. Upon hearing Uchvalusi saying that he finally had a solution, Lin Li immediately felt interested. Who wouldn't wish to have a strong subordinate? If he had to do everything himself, it would be pointless for him to have servants. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Lin Li asked, curiously. "Here's the thing, Master. I know of a secret solution that can help me break through the bottleneck now and let me advance to level 21. However, I would need a powerful skeleton and soul." Uchvalusi then glanced at the dragon graveyard, which contained dragon skeletons that were undoubtedly the best material. It turned out he just wanted the skeleton of a WYRM. Lin Li smiled and said, "That's easy. There are so many skeletons here. Pick one that you think is suitable, and you may keep it. However, be careful not to get too close to the center, even though the skeletons there may be better. Master, I can collect the dragon skeleton on my own, but I'll need your help with collecting the soul, Ujfalusi said with an awkward expression. If it were the soul of another powerful magical beast, it would be no problem for him to collect it with his own ability. However, the soul of a dragon was too powerful, and it would take him a long time even if he could collect it. Lin Li now had the level 21 vampire Norfeller as his servant. If Ujfalusi successfully advanced to level 21 too, in addition to the 2 WYRMS that he and Ujfalusi could summon, he would have massively powerful henchmen. The Dark Blade could become the largest force in the Breezy Plains precisely because of their 3 legendary leaders. With Lin Li's power, even the Dark Blade would have to be wary of him. Hence, no matter what, Lin Li had no reason to turn down his request. What was the harm in having better servants? Not to mention, this servant of his had already signed the soul contract, and thus would not turn on Lin Li. Moreover, Lin Li did not intend to let go of the dragon souls in the dragon graveyard. Although he did not know necromagic, there was more than one use to the dragon souls. After asking how he could help Ujfalusi collect the dragon soul, Lin Li deliberately chose a location that was far away from the center, and then took out Holy Light, one of the pieces of the debris of the stars. Although Lin Li decided to use Holy Light, he did not want to stimulate all of its power, and just wanted to suppress it using his own power instead. Otherwise, the power of the Holy Light alone would be enough to overwhelm all the dragon souls in this graveyard, and it would then be very likely to wake up any sleeping draulic. Lin Li held Holy Light in his hand and suppressed its strength, after which Holy Light emitted a light that was faint and not dazzling. However, under the light, the death aura around it seemed to begin twisting and moving subtly. Those were shadows, the dragon souls hidden in the death aura. Although they had already lost their sentience, they were still extremely afraid of Holy Light, hence their attempts to escape. It was said that after the death of the ancient WYRMS, all of their remaining spirits and consciousness would be condensed into dragon souls and enter a dragon graveyard hidden somewhere in endless time and space. However, the current dragons were not qualified to enter the real graveyard of ancient dragons. Moreover, due to genetic differences, all of the condensed dragon souls were obviously far inferior to those of the ancient WYRMS. Their consciousness was faint too. In fact, it could be said to be a spiritual aggregate without much awareness. Lin Li gently waved Holy Light to see the dragon souls that could not escape in time. They had lost their mobility, and could only struggle beneath the light. Although Lin Li could not maximize the power of Holy Light with his current abilities, he could manipulate it to his desire. Hence, he was now just restraining the dragon souls without doing any damage to them. After receiving Lin Li's instructions, Ujfalusi quickly took a step forward and rapidly chanted a spell while suppressing his fear of Holy Light. Finally, a bunch of dragon souls was dragged away from the envelope of Holy Light, flying towards Ujfalusi's magic staff. In the blink of an eye, they entered the grayish-white gemstone on the top of the magic staff. Lin Li naturally wouldn't waste the remaining dragon souls in the beams of light after helping Ujfalusi collect some. He planned to collect the remaining ones for future use in case he needed them after creating Black Front Fortress. However, at this moment, a massive pressure suddenly descended in the area outside the envelope of light created by the Holy Light. Before Lin Li could react, the beam burst like a bubble under the pressure. Next, there was an extremely chilly gust of aura flying towards Lin Li's face, making his heart skip a beat. It was the aura of a curse. Someone was clearly attacking him. Lin Li quickly put Holy Light in front of his chest to form a huge shield of light around him, blocking the attack. Lin Li then looked forward and saw that there was a twisted shadow rising slowly from the ground. There seemed to be a person who was shrouded in a magic robe composed of dense dark green fog. It was also emitting powerful magical aura. As the figure appeared, the death aura in the dragon graveyard instantly trembled vigorously, and a chilly aura filled the entire graveyard. Damn it, we've alarmed the draulic. Lin Li's heart wrenched up. No one knew better than he did. Although the figure seemed to be a human mage, it was what the draulic looked like when it cast magic spells. When the draulic used the talents and abilities that it had when it was a WYRM, it would become a WYRM again. Although its body looked a bit illusory, both its aura and menace were the same as that of a real WYRM. They could also deal massive damage. Lin Li was lamenting in his heart. He was clearly already in such an obscure corner. How did he end up alarming a draulic? Did draulics in Anril like sleeping near the edges of the graveyard? However, Lin Li soon found the answers to his questions. It was because on the other side of the graveyard, there was an extremely strong undead aura that overwhelmed him instantly. At this moment, Lin Li was no longer just lamenting, he was yelling miserably how unlucky he was. This is just a green dragon's graveyard. God knows why I'm so unlucky. Not only do I have to face a terrifying draulic, I also have to face two of them in one go. Double death dragons. How could the double death dragons appear here? Lin Li couldn't believe his eyes at all. The awakening of the draulic had taken him by surprise, but he had never imagined that there would be two in the low-level green dragon's graveyard. I'm so far away from the middle, yet I still alarmed the liches. Could it be that these two things haven't been sleeping in the center at all, and were both sleeping at the edges? It wasn't impossible to have more than two draulics in one dragon graveyard, but the appearance of the double death dragons did not mean that there were only two of them. The conditions for the emergence of the double death dragons were extremely harsh, and their appearance was even said to be possible only in theory because the double death dragons had to be twins, which was very rare for dragons with their extremely low reproduction ability. Next, the twin dragons had to rest in the dragon graveyard at the same time, and there could be no difference in the time of their deaths. Besides, after those conditions had been satisfied, all local conditions had to be the same when the twin dragons qualified to become draulics. However, even identical twins would grow up to be different from each other due to some external factors that they were exposed to during adolescence. Once there was a single difference, two draulics would be formed, and not the special double death dragons. If this were to happen to humans, perhaps it wouldn't be too surprising, since the human population was so vast. However, WYRMs had a low reproductive ability even though they had many descendants. 1. Hence, it was almost impossible for there to be twin dragons that had then become double death dragons, even if it were arranged by deities. Hence, even though Lin Li had experienced so many things in the endless world, the double death dragons were still a myth to him. Compared to ordinary draulics, the double death dragons enjoyed a tacit chemistry that could not be developed with mere practice. The double death dragons could cast spells seamlessly, once one of them was interrupted, the other would finish. They could also split up and disintegrate half a portion of a powerful spell each. Together, they would be able to destroy spells stronger than themselves. They were two individuals, but also a whole at the same time. That was what made them terrifying and difficult to deal with. Lin Li could clearly sense that the two draulics were definitely the legendary double death dragons. Their auras were identical, and they were so similar that Lin Li almost thought that he was hallucinating because he could not differentiate between them. The only thing that made Lin Li feel a little comforted was that the power of the double death dragons was not as terrifying as that of the draulic that he had encountered in the endless world. They seemed to be only level 22. However, that did not mean that they were easy to deal with. Back in Roland City, he'd battled Vidas, who was also level 22, yet the latter managed to drive him to despair. Moreover, the power of the level 22 double death dragons was definitely beyond level 22. Lin Li did not have time to think anymore. When he saw the two draulics, he immediately unleashed his magical domain. At this very moment, he realized that he couldn't get up to any scheming tricks with the double death dragons at all. He could only tide through by using all of his power. In the blink of an eye, the snow buried the dragon skeletons around Lin Li. Like the surface of an ocean, there were countless waves in the snow, and numerous snow magical beasts suddenly emerged and darted at the double death dragons. Hell! The double death dragons turned into dark green WYRMs that were covered in black fog. The two WYRMs opened their mouths at the same time and roared loudly, and it was as if the entire graveyard was going to crumble. countless snow magical beasts roared and dashed in. They then disintegrated. With Lin Li's current power of level 21, the snow magical beasts that he had created were at least level 15. However, they could not even withstand the roar of the double death dragons. The snow waves that kept rolling forward also suddenly rolled while the dragons roared. The waves of snow then swept towards Lin Li as if the owner of the magical domain was the double death dragons, and not Lin Li. The dragons roared, and Lin Li almost vomited blood as he unfolded all of his mental strength to control his magical domain. The overwhelming snow waves finally stopped in front of Lin Li, but before the waves could dissipate, countless skeletons had already showed themselves, and were attacking Lin Li. The layers of light lit up in front of Lin Li immediately. The light layers created by the holy light had a strong purification effect, and barely endured the attacks of the bone spears. If Lin Li were in the endless world, it would be a piece of cake for him to destroy the double death dragons with holy light. However, Lin Li was only level 21 now, and could not fully exert the power of holy light. Lin Li knew that in the face of a strong enemy like the double death dragons, he could only blindly defend for a while, and there would definitely be a moment when an opening appeared. Barely making it through the attacks of the double death dragons that occupied the initiative, Lin Li immediately reorganized his attacks. Soon, the angels of light and dark formed in front of him, holding all sorts of weapons. The angels of light and dark were formed by the congregation of the holy light and gloomy dark's rule powers. They all had strength of at least level 18, and had always been magical trump cards. Lin Li waved the Helios scepter, and more than 20 angels of light and dark that had just formed fluttered their wings immediately, flying towards the double death dragons in an aggressive manner. Before, the angels of light and dark had managed to suppress the Lord of Darkness alone for a while. Hence, Lin Li was certain that they would outclass the double death dragons regardless of how powerful the latter might be. However, before the angels of light and dark dashed to the double death dragons, a dark green dragon's breath spewed out of the double death dragons' mouths and consumed all of the angels of light and dark like the wind. Bang! Bang! Lin Li decisively detonated a few of the angels of light and dark. Under the conflicting powers of holy light and gloomy dark, several explosions occurred, and the dark green dragon's breath was blasted away. The remaining angels of light and dark dashed out of the dragon's breath, though they had been stained dark green, and their bodies were rapidly dissolving. After more than 20 angels of light and dark were attacked by the dragon breath, the remaining 10-odd insisted on rushing at the double death dragons. As a result, they all corroded and lost their original form. Lin Li again detonated them. Although the powerful blast caused the double death dragons to shake, it did not cause them any substantial harm. However, even if that was the case, the double death dragons were extremely infuriated. After roaring, they turned into humans again, and the dark green poisonous fog around them turned into a magic robe that engulfed them. As the wide robe sleeve fluttered, countless star dots flew towards Lin Li like falling stars. The stars of poison. Lin Li dared not believe his eyes at all. Others would usually release such level 18 necromagic spells one by one, yet the double death dragons released them all at once. The numerous snow walls collapsed the instant they were erected. Everything in Lin Li's magical domain was stained dark green. Although it was rare for there to be green snow, the horror of it still made Lin Li feel a cold chill down his spine as fear consumed him. In Lin Li's magical domain, the accumulated snow would never melt as long as the magical domain existed. However, the snow was corroded and melted at a very fast speed in the presence of the stars of poison. Thick fumes of poisonous fog continuously rose up from the pool of poison, filling the entire domain. Poison domain! Lin Li exclaimed with a frown as his face turned green. The power of destruction had already made the poison extremely lethal, and it was a true rule power. Poison that contained rule power was not comparable to the poisonous mist the team had encountered along the way. Even the green dragon's breath could not be compared to it. It was practically impossible for a legendary figure to press on. Lin Li didn't dare to hesitate, and quickly took a few potions from the Ring of Endless Storm. Not only were there high-level detoxification antidotes, there were also master-level potions. In addition to taking them himself, Lin Li also shared the potions with Ujfalusi and Norfeller. Although they were undead creatures, they could not resist the poison at all. The master-level potion was no less valuable than a level 20 magical crystal. However, at this moment, no one would bother to think about its value, because the most important thing now was to survive the attacks of the double death dragons. Lin Li poured the potion into his belly, after which he felt that the erosion was constrained, slowly expelled, and eliminated by the potion's power. However, the poison rule clearly affected Lin Li's magical domain. The snow magical beasts condensed at an extremely slow rate in the poisonous fog, and had yet to form a silhouette. Clearly, Lin Li had again lost the upper hand. The double death dragons induced their poison domain into the light and darkness domain, thus bearing a huge suppression on Lin Li's domain. Apart from the poison domain, Lin Li also felt the power of the death rule. It was the domain of the double death dragons. In this domain, the double death dragons were the supreme controller of life and death. The snow magical beasts did not crumble only because of the corrosion, but also because of the invasion of death energy. At this moment, a swirling black vortex slowly opened, and countless undead creatures surged out of it. Ujfalusi showed his prowess as a lich. After he returned to the legendary realm, his power had greatly increased beyond what he had had back in Sire Town. Low-level skeleton warriors, hell ghouls, vampires. Undead army was continuously summoned. Ujfalusi, too, knew that the low-level undead creatures could only play a very limited role, and might even be unable to qualify as meat shields. However, he still hoped that Tide of Death could help buy some time for Lin Li, even if it was only a few minutes or just a few seconds. The undead creatures were not afraid of the poison itself, but the corrosiveness of that poison was really impossible for the undead to resist. The skeletal warriors were stained with green right after they emerged from the vortex. They then fell onto the ground, corroded beyond recognition. Dozens of hell ghouls continuously fired infernal fire bombs, but the bombs could not even exit the radius of 10 meters, and were soon destroyed together with their masters. The mana of liches was stronger, so defensive spells were erected as soon as they left the portal. However, the spells instantly burst like a bubble. The double death dragons needed not do anything at all. The strong corrosive effects of the poison were enough to defeat legendary powerhouses and render the Tide of Death useless. Although the undead army attacked endlessly, they would be destroyed in no time. In other words, it's hard for pure-blooded dragons to be born, but easy for them to have a one-night stand with some other magical beast resembling a dragon and make a kid out of that. The descendants mentioned here are the latter type. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. Lin Li was holding onto a tree branch that had a newly sprouted bud on it, which was a new piece of the debris of the stars that he had obtained from the Time Consignment Store's auction. It contained the rule power of the earth and life, but Lin Li's control over it was shallow because he got it way after he obtained gloomy dark and holy light. With the experience that he once had, Lin Li extracted the life rule power from the branch and injected it into his own magical domain, allowing the magical domain of frost, light, and darkness to have a new aura of life. Soon, the snow magical beasts that had already stopped condensing quickly condensed again rapidly under this aura of life. Although the undead creatures had already lost their lives, becoming an undead creature was actually akin to having a fresh start in life, in a certain sense. The rebirth of the debris of the stars possessed life rules that gave them broader life, like the undead creatures. Hence, even the undead creatures that had emerged from the Tide of Death managed to experience a massive increase in power with the help of the aura of life. The bodies of the undead creatures were corroded in the poisonous fog, but they continuously recovered with the help of the energy of life. Although the recovery was slow, it could allow them to survive longer in the poisonous fog. Hell. The double death dragons clearly noticed the changes in their enemy Lin Li's domain. With their deafening roar, the ground of the dragon graveyard shook violently. Under the summoning of the double death dragons, the dragon skeletons woke up from hibernation, swaying their bodies. After shaking off the snow on their bodies, they strode towards Lin Li and the rest. Lin Li's magical domain contained the purification power of the holy light, which had great lethality to all undead creatures. However, the resurrected dragon skeletons were obviously not transformed into undead creatures by the double death dragon. The reason they could move like the humorous WYRM was simply because the double death dragons used a low-level necromagic spell to manipulate the corpses. Manipulating corpses could be considered the must-learn spell for every necromancer. It wasn't too powerful, and only served the purpose of making corpses move. However, the double death dragons manipulated the skeletons of WYRMs. Although they had yet to turn into undead creatures, they had power that was not inferior to a humorous WYRM's thanks to the manipulation by the double death dragons. Damn it, so shameless, Lin Li thought to himself in exasperation as his face turned pale and petulant. Although the dragon graveyard did not have a long history, there were more than 20 skeletons which possessed at least level 20 strength, even though they did not turn into undead creatures. When Lin Li had been outside just now, the 7 green dragons had almost driven him into a corner. Now that he was facing the siege of more than 20 dragon skeletons and the level 22 double death dragons, his chances of surviving were definitely slim. When he'd been outside, he could still let Norfeller use his blood-sucking abilities to attack the green dragons. However, Norfeller couldn't possibly suck the bones of the skeletons. Uchvalusi and Norfeller put in great effort into summoning the 2 humorous WYRMs, but when faced with the 20-odd dragon skeletons who were attacking him, he still could not change the situation. Under such tough circumstances, even the elemental WYRM Xiao Hua, who was living in Dream Garden, had already flown out to join the battle. However, resisting magic below level 15 was a piece of cake for the skeletal dragons, which had high resistance to magic. In addition to manipulating these 24 dragon skeletons, the double death dragons did not stop using their powerful necromagic at all. There were bursting bone spears that were as dense as rain, invincible stars of poison, and poisonous pools that took shape on the ground quietly. Be it the snow magical beasts or the strong undead creatures that Uchvalusi had summoned, all of them would easily become a pool of poison. The entire dragon graveyard seemed to have become a large battlefield, and the ever-growing undead creatures and the 20-odd dragon skeletons surrounded Lin Li and others. The magic of various levels seemed to have become stagnant while flying around. However, Lin Li did not feel optimistic at all, because the formidable double death dragons were approaching from far away. The rule power in the poisonous death domain, endless necromagic, and the 20-odd dragon skeletons caused Lin Li and the rest to fall into despair. The standstill at this moment was an illusion. Once the double death dragons joined in, Lin Li's defense would instantly collapse and crumble. Lin Li clenched his teeth and persisted on. However, he also knew that at this rate, even the debris of the stars wouldn't be able to save him from the tragic ending. Breaking the magical domain of a draulic would be more than difficult for a level 21 mage like Lin Li. The draulic itself had power of level 22, which was far greater than what Lin Li possessed. Others might think that it was only a difference of 1 level. However, that difference meant a different mastery of rule power, which brought about a world of difference in strength. The magical domain was created by a mage using the rule power that he'd mastered. The deeper the understanding of rule power, the stronger and more stable the nature magic would be. Hence, if Lin Li wanted to advance in level and break the magical domain of a draulic, it would definitely be impossible with his current abilities. During the battle with the elven mage Vidas back then, Lin Li had not only summoned Gloomy Dark and Holy Light. He had also summoned the Lord of Nightmares to assist him in the battle to defeat Vidas. Lin Li was now facing 2 twin-level 22 draulics, which were double death dragons, and thus closely integrated with the magical domain of theirs. It no longer mattered who the domain was created by. The power of 2 level 22 magical domains and rule power were not simply superimposed. Breaking through the double magical domain of the double death dragons was akin to breaking the sky for Lin Li. However, Lin Li had really thought of a solution, and reckoned that he should be able to break through the magical domains of the double death dragons. However, the problem was that it was just a simple thought, and Lin Li did not have the ability to execute it. At this very moment, Lin Li's heart skipped a beat, and he acutely felt some changes in his own magical domain. The rule power that came from gloomy dark seemed to be flowing out of his domain. Although energy was depleting every second since the magical domain was opened, depletion was different from exhaustion. Lin Li was also slightly stunned by the double death dragons, thus causing him to fail to notice the situation. Although the slight depletion of dark force was nothing to gloomy dark that had infinite power, Lin Li could not help but feel worried, because it meant that he had lost his control over his magical domain. Lin Li immediately devoted all his energy to his magical domain to find the reason for the depletion of dark force, but the result of the check surprised him. It was the double death dragons. Although the double death dragons continuously used necromagic to attack Lin Li and the rest, they were reluctant to join the battle, yet it was not because they did not have the power to fight. In fact, the power that the double death dragons possessed was probably not inferior to that of the Green Dragon King. Lin Li now understood the reason for the double death dragons not joining the battle. It turned out they were devouring the dark force emitted by gloomy dark. Lin Li suddenly remembered that at the beginning, the existence of gloomy dark catalyzed the mutation of many undead creatures in the Scar of Death. Even the lowest level skeletal warriors almost reached level 10. It also resulted in the birth of the powerful Death Knight and vampires, causing the valley to become the paradise of undead creatures. To the undead creatures, the pure dark force of gloomy dark was a temptation they could not resist. Lin Li could clearly feel that the power in gloomy dark was surging outwards, and dashing towards the undead creatures. It seemed that even the double death dragons, or the formidable draulics, could not resist the temptation of the dark force. Could that be the key to changing the situation? Lin Li thought about it, and vaguely felt that it was the case. Gloomy dark was separated from the magical domain and landed in Lin Li's hands. However, the devouring force that came from the double death dragons was still chasing gloomy dark, with no intention of letting go. Lin Li tried to control the depletion of power, but the devouring force of the double death dragons continuously increased. It might only be possible to interrupt the devouring force of the double death dragons by loading gloomy dark into the Ring of Endless Storm. The thought of the Ring of Endless Storm reminded Lin Li of the Titan Dragon Spear that he had collected in the valley. If he could use the power of the Titan Dragon Spear, the double death dragons would probably be no match for it. The Titans had used the Titan Dragon Spear to kill the ancient WYRMS, and the Titan Dragon Spear contained groundbreaking power of thunderbolts, which was much more lethal to undead creatures than Holy Light. Unfortunately, the Titan Dragon Spear had already gone into hibernation, and perhaps could only be awakened by Thunderbolt, the debris of the stars. A Titan Dragon Spear would be useless if it couldn't exert its power, regardless of how powerful it might be. Feeling frustrated, Lin Li wondered, is it really difficult to solve this issue? The situation was no longer optimistic, and his humorous WYRMS had already been scarred and wounded. Uchvalusi's Tide of Death had also reached its last moments. Although the skeletal warriors were still emerging continuously, the powerful vampires and liches were appearing less often. Norfeller looked just as disheveled. Vampires were not good at direct confrontations, but he did not have a choice at all. He could only rely on his level 21 power to go toe-to-toe against the dragon skeletons. Lin Li reintroduced gloomy dark into his magical domain, and increased the control over the dark force. Although he could not cut off the devouring force completely, it was still Lin Li's magical domain, after all. He wouldn't let the double death dragons get their way. Next, Lin Li once again forcibly extracted the life force of the debris of the stars and introduced it into the magical domain. With the injection of this life force, the bodies of Lin Li's undead servants and the two humorous WYRMS immediately recovered by half, regaining their battle power as well. Even the undead creatures that Uchvalusi had summoned together with the Tide of Death had been revived. The crushed skeletal warriors rose from the ground and slashed the legs and feet of the dragon skeletons with rusty swords. The skeleton staff glowed again and death fire bombs were launched. The vampires moved along the WYRM skeletons at their own speed while making sounds of friction. Had there been any onlookers just now, they would have definitely been surprised by the tenacity of the people from the Tower of Dusk, thinking that they would pull through the ordeal. However, only Lin Li knew that rebirth wouldn't integrate into the magical domain, and not only would the forced injection affect the stability of the magical domain, it might even lead to the collapse of the magical domain. While supporting the magical domain, it was necessary to control the devouring force in this battle, but that had exceeded the ability of a level 21 mage. Although it seemed that the situation had improved for now, the double death dragons had yet to join in, and Lin Li had merely managed to buy some time. The price of doing so was the severe overuse of Lin Li's mental strength. Hell! The double death dragons roared in unison, and one of them burst into a black cloud of fog instantly before turning into a green dragon, while the other leaped onto that dragon's back, and they fluttered towards Lin Li. Obviously, the double death dragons were angered by Lin Li's behavior. No one would be able to keep calm after their benefits got stolen. Although the double death dragons could turn into human form and cast magic, their animalistic nature would never change. For some reason, the double death dragons could not endure after seeing the invaders. Although Lin Li was rather far from the double death dragons when he took out Gloomy Dark from his magical domain, they could clearly tell that the aura they liked came from the unknown object. Since they were displeased, they might as well get rid of the invaders and snatch the item. By then, they would get to enjoy it without hindrances. Despite being in a desperate situation, Lin Li still got a shock when he saw the fiery double death dragons. It could be said that the manipulated dragon skeletons were nothing compared to the double death dragons. Lin Li waved the Helios scepter in his hand, and rays of light of purification fell from the sky and projected themselves at the double death dragons. Although holy light, a piece of the debris of the stars had the ability to exude the light of purification, which could destroy all evil, it had no effect on the poison of the double death dragons. The angels of light and dark condensed again, and flew silently towards the double death dragons as their large spears radiated eye-catching bright rays of light. However, the 30-odd angels of light and dark could not even make the double death dragons stop for a second, and all they did was make the double death dragons roar. The difference in power was too huge, and Lin Li could not even struggle much. Lin Li's retaliation seemed useless, and the scheming tricks that he used to use were weak and ridiculously useless against the double death dragons. However, he was not going to give up just like that. Lin Li made up his mind, and the angels of light and dark continuously condensed like moths fighting on fire as they continuously dashed towards the double death dragons. They were hellbent on inflicting some harm on the double death dragons even if they died. The jewels on the top of the Helios scepter continuously flashed, and every glisten signified a strong and powerful magic. With every flash, the light would become dimmer. Although Lin Li felt distressed, what else could he do? As long as he could escape today, it would be worthwhile, even if it meant that the Helios scepter had to break. All of a sudden, the entire graveyard was filled with death aura, and a huge vortex opened in front of the double death dragons. Countless skeletons of humans and magical beasts surged out of the middle of the vortex, and the deafening and shrilling howls filled the entire graveyard. They then swarmed towards Lin Li. The Rune of Death. Looking at the oncoming legendary necromagic, Lin Li waved his staff, and an ice wall fused with the holy light was instantly erected. The ice wall shattered with a loud explosive sound that filled the air. However, the countless skeletons seemed to break through the ice walls. Lin Li again whipped out the new piece of the debris of the stars, rebirth, and put up a defensive layer in front of himself. As the roars continuously sounded, Lin Li slowly retreated backwards. The death energy contained life rules, and the power of the rules of the Earth system was known for its powerful defense against the elements fire, water, and wind. Therefore, under the powerful attack of the legendary necromagic spell Death Rune, Lin Li continuously retreated, but he still managed to forcibly support himself. Lin Li was shot far, far away, and the double death dragons flew over the heads of Ujfalusi and Norfeller in their pursuit for Lin Li. However, they did not pay attention to what was going on below. In the eyes of the double death dragons, only the powerful object was worth paying attention to, and what they wanted to do was to kill the intruder and snatch the object. Ujfalusi, Norfeller, and the two humorous WYRMs had already been surrounded by the animated dragon skeletons. Hence, they could only watch the double death dragons fly over their heads without being able to stop them. Of course, with their current power, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything even if they were to rush forth. Lin Li finally stopped retreating, not because of the explosion of power, but because he had already reached the wall of the cavern, and even made a huge indent in it. He was almost buried. Staring at the double death dragons that were approaching him, Lin Li broke apart the rubble around his body and stood up. The dim gemstone on the top of the Helios scepter once again radiated a dazzling ray of light that caused the magic in the entire magical domain to surge. Holy light and gloomy dark, the two pieces of the debris of the stars, appeared beside Lin Li, giving off a destructive aura with Lin Li's activation. The double death dragons stopped and turned into humans again, seemingly having sensed the energy and power coming from Lin Li's side. The two identical draulics also appeared solemn. The two draulics raised their arms at the same time and moved in unison. As they moved, the strong energy slowly rose too. It was because he survived the rune's attack that he managed to gain the respect of the two of them. In fact, they did not wish to wait any longer. Lin Li smiled wryly, and thought to himself, seems like the double death dragons are ready to kill me now. Despite seeing that the double death dragons were going to launch a quick and powerful attack against him, Lin Li did not take the lead to interrupt them, and instead continued to use his mental strength to activate the power of the debris of the stars. He then instilled all of his mana into the Helios scepter with no regards for his own life or safety. Battling the double death dragons with magic? Lin Li was deep in despair, but his brains were not fried, so he knew better than that. In fact, it took only 2 or 3 seconds for the double death dragons to cast spells. A strong, destructive mana suddenly emerged from the two draulics. Lin Li couldn't name the magic used by the double death dragons, but it seemed to be a mixture of necromagic and dragon language magic. The magical wave had also exceeded level 22, and seemed powerful enough to destroy the sky. In fact, it was truly lethal, and a crack formed in front of the double death dragons before darting towards Lin Li. Many powerhouses had the ability to break through space. Even those of the sanctuary realm could do so and enter the chaos of time and space. However, Lin Li had never heard of anyone using the cracks between time and space to deal with one's enemies. Although he had never heard of it, he could tell that even if the new force erupted again, it couldn't escape the fate of being torn in two by the crack. Despite having been startled by the magic of the double death dragons, Lin Li didn't forget to retaliate. He simply chose to retrieve the Titan Dragon Spear from the Ring of Endless Storm first. With the death of the Titan, the power in the Titan Dragon Spear had also gone into hibernation. It could also be said to have died because it had already lost its soul, and Lin Li could not awaken it at all with his current power, not even if coupled with holy light and gloomy dark. Lin Li had thought of using a piece of the debris of the stars, Thunderbolt, to awaken the Titan Dragon Spear. However, if he had Thunderbolt, it wouldn't matter even if the Titan Dragon Spear didn't awaken. Hence, to Lin Li, the Titan Dragon Spear had already lost its value as a weapon, and all he cared about was the material of the Titan Dragon Spear and the power it contained. However, the Titan Dragon Spear was the only thing that was durable enough to withstand the power of the crack. Immediately after the appearance of the majestic Titan Dragon Spear, Lin Li grasped it and threw it at the crack, which was followed by holy light, gloomy dark, and magic that had been accumulating in the Helios scepter. The target of the three huge forces was not the double death dragons, but the Titan Dragon Spear. Boom! After the groundbreaking noise filled the air, Lin Li's body slammed into the wall with a lot of force, and the cracks rapidly extended. He'd been waiting for this chance. Lin Li had wanted to make the double death dragons join the battle. Otherwise, if the draulics were to rely on the poison and death domains, as well as the 20-odd WYRM skeletons, without entering the battle directly, it would only have been a matter of time before Lin Li's team got destroyed without an opportunity to counterattack, let alone break out of the tricky situation. Since his own powers coupled with holy light and gloomy dark were not enough to launch the Titan Dragon Spear, how would things change if the double death dragons joined in? Lin Li already saw the result. Four powerful forces bombarded the Titan Dragon Spear at the same time, but although the Titan Dragon Spear cracked, it did not immediately become fragmented. However, a thunderbolt darted out of the crack all of a sudden and shot at the double death dragons without hesitation, seemingly having been attracted by the WYRMS aura. It was a thunderbolt that had once broken the ground, and had been incorporated into the Titan's consciousness. It had also been stained with the blood of many ancient WYRMS that it had destroyed. The double death dragons had no time to respond at all. They seemed to have been shocked by the terrifying aura given off by Thunderbolt. Suddenly, the Thunderbolt blasted the indestructible poison and death domains, and ruthlessly invaded the bodies of the double death dragons to destroy them. For the first time, the double death dragons wailed in agony, but regardless of how they struggled and shapeshifted, they could not stop the Thunderbolt from destroying their bodies. Lin Li wiped the blood off of the corners of his lips and flew away from the wall. He then grabbed Holy Light and injected mental strength into it. Holy Light suddenly shone and engulfed Lin Li like a sun that had descended onto the dragon graveyard. The power of Holy Light engulfed the double death dragons, and the howling gradually became weaker, until they vanished completely. The skeletons surrounding Ujfalusi also crumbled, and silence was restored. The light of Holy Light slowly converged, and Lin Li slowly landed on the ground with no trace of joy on his face. He staggered forwards for a while before regaining his balance. He quickly took out a few healing potions and poured them into his mouth like he was drinking water. Lin Li heaved a long sigh after sensing that his wounds were slowly recovering. Staring at his undead servants, he said, "Take them now." Upon hearing Lin Li's words, Ujfalusi and Norfeller finally heaved sighs of relief too. Recalling the battle just now, they could not help but feel a little bit nervous even though they were undead creatures. The two undead servants and the two humorous WYRMS searched the Green Dragon graveyard all over. In fact, there was no need for them to put in too much effort, because the battle had already turned everything in the graveyard inside out, especially the WYRM skeletons that had accumulated there. As a pharmaceutics guru, Lin Li possessed master-level recovery potions, which helped his body recover greatly. He no longer had any worries. He'd initially planned to enter and steal, but it ended up becoming an armed robbery. Since he had already killed all the owners of the graveyard, the remaining items were for him to keep. Although there were numerous cracks in the Titan Dragon Spear, Lin Li could sense the massive energy in it, and the thunderbolt that took out the double death dragons was nothing compared to it. Lin Li couldn't help but cluck his tongue. It was no wonder that the Titan Dragon Spear was the weapon of the Titans. It could effortlessly kill the double death dragons in no time. After withdrawing the Titan Dragon Spear from the Ring of Endless Storm, Lin Li again summoned Gloomy Dark that had been blasted away just now. However, when Gloomy Dark returned, it gave Lin Li a great shock, not because it was damaged, but because there were actually two more black beads that resembled satellites constantly revolving around it. What is this? Lin Li grabbed Gloomy Dark. As soon as he did, he could sense the aura of the double death dragons coming from the pearls. Could that be the imprint of the double death dragons? Lin Li did know some things about the imprinting of souls. After being transformed into a lich, human beings would keep their soul imprint in the life case so that they could be born again with the soul imprint even if they died. Therefore, most people would not dare to provoke them unless they could find and destroy their life case. Otherwise, they would be in deep trouble because they would have to face the revenge of the lich. However, if one could find the life case of a lich, he would be able to subdue the lich, regardless of how powerful it might be. However, draulics were different from human liches. WYRMS used dragon crystals as their source of power, and lost the ability to use dragon crystals after transforming into draulics. Their soul imprint then became their source of strength. Therefore, the draulica's soul imprint would not be hidden in the life case, but would replace the position of dragon crystal in the draulica's body. In other words, the two satellite-like black beads of light revolving around Gloomy Dark were previously the source of power for the double death dragons. However, under the purification of the holy light, the power in these two soul imprints had obviously disappeared. Although there was no more power, they were still revolving around Gloomy Dark, perhaps because they were driven by a trace of instinct left. However, for Lin Li, that was not something to be happy about. Although the double death dragons were powerful, the two purified black beads were no longer of any use. Not only was there no trace of power in them, they were continuously leeching off and depleting the energy within gloomy dark. The two were basically just parasites, and Lin Li had never liked incurring a loss. After thinking for a moment, Lin Li let out some mana and got ready to completely erase the soul imprints of the double death dragons. However, with the input of that minute amount of mana, Lin Li suddenly found that there was a slight resistance from those two black beads. Although the resistance was faint and seemed to be easily erasable, Lin Li was still surprised. It was completely different from what he had guessed. Lin Li withdrew his mana and looked at the two black beads with a slight frown. Although the resistance was insignificant, it meant that there was still the consciousness of the double death dragons within the black beads. Could it be that the double death dragons did not completely die after being purified by the holy light, and instead continued to live in another form? With the experience Lin Li had obtained in the endless world, he dared say that he was knowledgeable, but the situation was truly beyond fathomable for him now. Even though he did not have a detailed understanding of undead creatures, he knew that draulics were undead creatures. Holy light, one of the pieces of the debris of the stars, no doubt contained the rule power of light and the ability to purify all evil beings. Although the holy light could not exert all its power when Lin Li was controlling it, the double death dragons had also been seriously injured by the thunderbolt in the Titan dragon spear. Judging from the results, Lin Li could deduce that they had indeed been purified by the holy light. Otherwise, how could they have become two black beads? Lin Li thought about it, but couldn't understand why the two soul imprints left behind by the double death dragons would become such peculiar existences. Could it be that the double death dragons were not considered undead creatures? Lin Li suddenly came up with an idea which even he was taken aback by. It was undoubtedly a very ridiculous idea. However, apart from this absurd and ridiculous explanation, Lin Li couldn't think of anything else to accredit the phenomenon to. Lin Li shook his head helplessly. Since no reasonable explanation could be found, there was no point in dwelling on it. Even if the absurd theory held, the matter was beyond the scope of his own ability, and there was no need to waste his time mulling over it. It was a matter of changing life forms and a realm that could only be reached by those who were at the peak of the sanctuary realm. Even Lord Osric could not achieve such a feat in the past, let alone Lin Li. Although he gave up and stopped thinking about the matter, Lin Li still wondered about something. He had no idea if it was true, but maybe it had something to do with the immortal king. It was actually extremely easy to dispose of those two black beads left behind by the double death dragons, but Lin Li did not erase them. Instead, he let them continue to absorb the power in gloomy dark. It would be difficult to make the infinite power in gloomy dark be reduced significantly even if there were 200 of those beads around it. Besides, Lin Li was not really that generous. As time passed and he gained more experience and profound understanding of magic, he actually gained more knowledge about the debris of the stars too. In fact, Lin Li had been aware since a long time ago that gloomy dark was not as generous as it appeared to be. On the surface, it seemed that gloomy dark was very generous and selfless by giving its energy to all dark creatures. However, there were indications that while gloomy dark provided power to dark creatures, it was also gaining something from dark creatures in an inexplicable way. Moreover, it was not like a positive cycle, but was akin to fishing. Gloomy dark was like an experienced fisherman who threw out only a few insignificant lures, but was catching big fishes. Although the process was still incomprehensible and couldn't be explained by any theory, Lin Li believed that the speculation should be correct. The best proof of that should be the undead creatures in the Scar of Death. Gloomy dark had been there for more than 1,300 years, and the pure dark force created countless powerful mutant undead creatures, including legendary liches and legendary humorous wyrms. During this process, Lin Li could hardly imagine how much effort and power gloomy dark had to give out. However, after 1,300 years, Lin Li obtained gloomy dark and could clearly sense that the gloomy dark power was much stronger than what he had imagined. Lin Li now had 3 pieces of the debris of the stars in his hands, namely Holy Light, Gloomy Dark, and Rebirth. Each contained different rules and had different characteristics. However, if the other characteristics were put aside and only strength was taken into consideration, Gloomy Dark, which had selflessly given out its energy and power for more than 1,300 years, was the most powerful of them. Lin Li was not at all worried about the energy and power of Gloomy Dark. If its energy were depleted, it wouldn't be a real magical artifact. As for the soul imprints of the double death dragons, Lin Li did not care what kind of changes would occur after they absorbed the power of Gloomy Dark. Amril was a world where only the strong would survive, and strength was the basis of comparison. Before their deaths, the double death dragons were powerful twin dragons, which became horrible twin draulics after their death. However, what was left of them now was only the primal soul imprint that could only survive by relying on the power provided by Gloomy Dark. They were in no place to compete with Lin Li. Perhaps, one day, the soul imprints of the double death dragons would absorb enough power from Gloomy Dark to re-emerge as the double death dragons. But so what if they did? Since all of their power came from Gloomy Dark, Lin Li could erase them effortlessly with a wave of his wand. Not to mention, Lin Li might only be level 21 and a beginner in the legendary realm, but he held the magical ring with Evil Eye Tyrant's crystal and the god of mages Juresco's Book of Eternity. He also had perfect magical talent gotten in the Endless World. 1. It'd be impossible for him not to surpass the double death dragons. With such advantages, Lin Li did not know exactly how the soul imprints of the double death dragons were formed or how long they'd existed, but one thing for sure was that he had absolute control over the 2 soul imprints. 1. If you remember the very beginning of the novel, it was said that Lin Li basically maxed out the potential of a mage avatar in the Endless World game, and he got sent to Amril with all that intact. That's also where his skills in pharmacy and so on came from. Lin Li, of course, wouldn't leave any dangers by his side. His confidence was what allowed him not to be worried about the rebellion of these 2 soul imprints. As for the power that he could fully grasp, obviously the stronger, the better. Lin Li could not wait to see if these 2 soul imprints could really re-emerge as the horrible double death dragons after absorbing enough power. After putting Gloomy Dark away, Lin Li began to count the gains from this battle. Previously, Lin Li had wanted to secretly reap the benefits. After all, the strength of the draulic was too terrifying. Unfortunately, the double death dragons did not save Lin Li any face at all, and instead forced him into becoming an armed robber. Now that there were only a few soul imprints left, Lin Li would be letting them down if he didn't excavate the dragon graveyard completely. Dragon skeletons were a rare find, and plenty of necromancers and liches could never ride them. However, Lin Li managed to obtain more than 20 of them all at once. Although it was said that those that died in the dragon graveyard might not be powerful WYRMs, there were indeed some high-quality skeletons among these 20-odd ones. Moreover, even the weakest WYRM was of legendary level, hence, the skeletons wouldn't be too shabby. Lin Li was dazed by the numerous dragon skeletons. Ever since he arrived in Amril, he had scoured and obtained some treasures, but it was his first time collecting so many WYRM skeletons in one go. Even the Throne of Darkness and the Lord of Darkness, the projected avatar of the Dragon of Destruction, could not find so many skeletons despite having been in the abyss of Tharlan for so long. Lin Li clenched his fists and thought about how these dragon skeletons could be used, but there were countless possibilities. He decided to forget it and put them away for now, since there were too many things he could do. He decided to figure it out slowly after he returned. In the dragon graveyard, those dragon skeletons might be eye-catching, but they were definitely not the most valuable. The dazzling legendary dragon crystals were actually much more outstanding and mesmerizing. Lin Li was actually surrounded by bottomless pits that consumed magical crystals rapidly. In addition to Xiao Hua, who treated magical crystals like candy, he also had the Dragon of Destruction's dragon crystal waiting to hatch. His subordinates in the Tower of Dusk had to set up huge magical crystal cannons, and he also had plans to get the people from the Dwarf Kingdom to recreate the Skybreaker, which had once shot down a sky castle. Lin Li had no idea if the 20-odd legendary magical crystals would be enough, but he was sure that he couldn't let Xiao Hua go hungry. Hence, he hurriedly grabbed Xiao Hua and shoved 2 level 25 magical crystals into its mouth, before stuffing it back into Dream Garden, ignoring its refusals. Lin Li discovered another surprise among the dragon crystals. There were 2 crystals that gave off an identical aura and magical wave. Clearly, the 2 legendary magical crystals used to belong to the double death dragons. Each of the 2 legendary dragon crystals were much stronger than the rest in terms of mana, but together, they were much more valuable than the rest. The 2 dragon crystals were completely in sync, and they would exude massive power if used together with high-level mageweaths. After Lin Li placed all the dragon crystals in the Ring of Endless Storm, Ujfalusi handed him 2 dragon soul herbs. They were the greatest gain in Lin Li's opinion, though they might be useless for anyone else. Taking into account the previously collected ones, Lin Li now had nearly 20 dragon soul herbs. As a pharmaceutics guru, he definitely could concoct amazing master-level potions. However, despite such a huge gain, Lin Li was somewhat dissatisfied. Following the outbreak of holy light, the dragon souls wandering in the dragon graveyard were completely purified. The only dragon soul that Lin Li had obtained was the one that had been captured by Ujfalusi previously, which made Lin Li feel rather frustrated. After searching the dragon graveyard, Lin Li took his 2 undead servants, and walked towards the teleportation portal. He wondered how furious the Green Dragon King would feel when he returned and saw that this graveyard had been cleared out. Lin Li and the others walked and took occasional rests in between. When they finally reached the teleportation portal, their wounds seemed to have healed. If anyone were to see them drinking the master-level recovery potions like they were drinking water, they would definitely be criticized. However, Lin Li was a pharmaceutics guru. Besides, he didn't have any idea as to where the teleportation portal would lead them to. All he could do was to adjust and adapt as well as he could so as not to have any regrets. This time, Lin Li didn't hesitate anymore, and took his undead servants directly to the teleportation portal. After loading it with a few magical crystals, he activated the teleportation portal, which emitted a dazzling ray of light that immediately engulfed Lin Li and his servants. However, during the teleportation, Lin Li suddenly sensed that something was amiss with the teleportation portal. Lin Li was not an alchemy ignoramus. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to set up the alchemy array that he'd used to defeat the Titan spirit. Although he had yet to set up his own teleportation portal in Amril, he was rather familiar with the operation of teleportation portals. Generally, the teleportation portal used the power of space in crystals and mageweaths or alchemy arrays to carry out the teleportation. Hence, the person being teleported usually hardly felt anything during the teleportation. However, the teleportation portal that Lin Li had just activated was completely different from the ones he knew. After activation, he did not complete the transmission instantly or reach his destination immediately. Perhaps 1 minute might not feel like anything extraordinary normally, but to Lin Li, 1 minute felt longer than a lifetime. During this minute, time and space were constantly intertwined, reminding Lin Li of the unforgettable journey from the Endless World to Amril. A long journey such as this was definitely not an ordinary transmission. However, at this moment, Lin Li couldn't do anything except suppress his fear and wait for the end of the teleportation. Indeed, when Lin Li sensed that something was appearing beneath his feet, everything around him had become different. An ancient city was right in front of Lin Li at this moment. The city exuded a mysterious vibe, and he stood rooted to the ground in shock. The towers were tall, the houses were neatly lined up, and the streets were paved with spotless moonstone. A rainbow-like ray of light hovered above him in the sky, and through that layer of light, lightning and rain could still be seen. Lin Li knew that it was the legendary nether storm. It was said that lethal nether storms were rampant in every corner of time and space. Even a strong figure of the sanctuary realm would be torn to pieces in a flash when he got caught up in a nether storm. However, the terrifying nether storm seemed to have been blocked by that rainbow. Although it looked horrifying, it was not dangerous at all. In fact, it turned into a beautiful and natural scenery of the city. Lin Li looked around in awe, and his gaze began to turn clearer. staring at everything in front of him. An unbelievable answer formed in his heart. It was a sky castle. The seventh sky castle. It was the seventh sky castle that had disappeared in the battle that overwhelmed the entire Anril and determined the fate of the High Elves and all human races during the Dark Age. More than 1,300 years had passed, and most of the events of that year had become legends. In that year, along with the last High Elves, the seventh sky castle broke into the cracks of time and space and left the world of Anril with a legend that would go on forever. However, the seventh sky castle, which let everyone's imagination run wild, seemed to have been destroyed. There was a dead silence in the entire city, and there were no sounds of breathing or heartbeat at all. It was as if even time itself had died. Lin Li snapped out of his trance, looked around vigilantly, and wondered if other people also came here through the teleportation portal. Lin Li's worry was not uncalled for. If it were an ordinary teleportation portal, the entrance and exit would of course be fixed. However, that one was obviously not an ordinary teleportation portal. Would an ordinary teleportation last for 1 minute? Ordinary teleportation portals would not directly flow through the cracks of time and space. Who knew if there was another exit? With doubts in his heart, Lin Li took out a map of the sky castle and compared it to the surrounding buildings. He quickly found his position and continued to walk towards the middle of the sky castle while following the directions on the map. When he'd got the map of the sky castle, he had just reached the boundary of the legendary realm, and the sky castle that was drifting in time and space was still a bit ethereal for him. However, that did not mean that Lin Li had not taken the map seriously. After all, he had also obtained the key to the sky castle from Juresco. Hence, after returning from the Blackstone Mountains, Lin Li had spent plenty of time studying the map. Not only had he consulted a lot of scholars who were proficient in High Elf's language, he also wrote to the old Apophis who had participated in the war to ask about the sky castle. Lin Li's understanding of the map was much better than in the beginning. Hence, it was clear to him that the tower in the middle was the hub of the entire sky castle. Lin Li and his undead servants strolled along the empty streets, marveling at the massive size of the sky castle while following the map's instructions. If it were not for the in-depth study that he had conducted on Sky Castle, it would have been impossible to imagine how hefty the construction costs of the Sky Castle were. Even the High Elves who had dominated the world of Anril had had to give up everything they had to build the seventh Sky Castle. At that time, the High Elves had power over the entire land of Anril. The prices of the precious building materials were beyond calculating, for the remains of the Dragon of Destruction were simply priceless. When Lin Li had obtained the map, he shockingly discovered that the huge conquering mage web formed by the streets and the 36 tall towers surrounding them could kill at least hundreds of WYRMs. Clearly, the construction cost of the Sky Castle was beyond imaginable. However, there were countless legends about the Sky Castles going around Anril, though few people knew what the source of the power of the castle was. What was it that could support such a huge castle and travel through the chaos of time and space? Even Apophis and others who had experienced the war in person were unsure. In the 1,300 years after the Dark Age, there had been plenty of legends about sky castles. Of course, there were also many speculations about that source of power. Some guessed that it was the magical crystal of an ancient WYRM, while others guessed that it was a manipulation of the ancient deities. There were even some who guessed that the High Elves had captured the Pantheon and plundered countless Titan spirits. In short, there had been many speculations, but Lin Li knew that there was none that could really come close to the truth. Perhaps Juresco was the only human being who knew the truth about the Sky Castle. In the year of the war, Juresco had once personally ascended to the Sky Castle and killed the Queen of the High Elves under the World Tree. Okay, Lin Li, who had read the Book of Eternity, could be considered another one, to a minimal extent. However, no matter how much information Lin Li had acquired and how profound his understanding of the Sky Castle was, he still could not contain his shock now that he was in this magnificent city of miracles. This was the nightmare of all the races that had been dominated during the Dark Age. Known as the Sky Castles that would never fall, they had helped the High Elves suppress plenty of rebellions and caused lots of heroes of all races to end with hatred. Although the sky castles that were known as ones that would never fall had been destroyed in the War of Rebellion led by Juresco, the god of mages, the reputation of the sky castles was not damaged. On the contrary, after that war, people got to know more about the power of the sky castles and how hefty the price of rebelling against it would be. If it weren't for Juresco, who'd happened to have a major increase in power after breaking through to the next realm, and the dwarves who had created the now long-lost Skybreaker, the war that had engulfed the entire Anril would have been tragic and horrendous. The rebelling forces would have then faced the attacks by the High Elves again, with rivers of blood flowing among rebels. However, people could not help but yearn for the legend of the sky castles, despite fearing and detesting them. Even Juresco, who'd once destroyed a sky castle, regarded the sky castles highly in the Book of Eternity. Lin Li's footsteps were very slow. He was constantly scanning across the street, his eyes full of awe for the great city of miracles. He had never experienced the war at the end of the Dark Age, nor witnessed the formidable power of sky castles, but he could tell what a sky castle would look like when it showed its prowess. The construction of the sky castle did not comprise of just stacking precious materials. The various techniques used during the construction were amazing even for Lin Li, the freak with master-level accomplishments in all crafts. The wisdom of the High Elves was perfectly displayed in this city, be it the magewefts, or the alchemy arrays, or even the remote magic gears. All of those items could be considered the most representative pinnacle of work of the High Elves, be it in the Dark Age more than 1,300 years ago, or in the present. It could be said that although the war in the Dark Age had brought about long-awaited freedom to humans and other races, it had also caused many skills to suffer setbacks. It had been long since a guru appeared amongst humans. Even the Pharmacists' Guild, which had an extraordinary position in Anril, only relied on a few masters to survive. The Master of Inscription, Master Moke, who had been sent by the Supreme Council to draw the magewef for the Tower of Dusk in the past, held a high status in the Supreme Council even though he was just a master. However, there was an absolute gap between the masters of the Dark Age and the current ones. Could one really be considered a master just because he could formulate a master-level potion and draw a master-level magewef? In addition to that, there were also plenty of skills that had even completely disappeared. The apprentices learning those skills were hard to find, what more the masters. Although they had been walking slowly along the empty streets, Lin Li and others were still far from their destination, the skyscraper that was located in the center of the sky castle. Although the two undead servants were puzzled, they followed closely, fulfilling their duties as servants. Someone who hadn't done a lot of research on magewefts would definitely laugh out loud and mock the High Elves for having a terrible design of the sky castle. For it seemed absurd for one to make a huge detour to get to a place that was obviously not that far. Was it necessary to make the city seem like a labyrinth? Could it really stop the intruders? However, Lin Li clearly knew that the design of the sky castle was one of the important reasons why it was considered a sky city that never fell. Back when Lin Li had got the blueprint of the sky castle, he vaguely made a terrible guess after analyzing the design of the streets. However, now that he was in the place itself, he deduced that his guess was right, for the evidence further confirmed his guess that these zigzagging streets and the tower scattered around him constituted a huge conquering magewef. Even though this magewef might not have been activated for more than 1,300 years, the solid and powerful aura still filled the streets and alleys, making it seem intimidating. In Anril, there was probably no one who knew the horror of the conquering magewef better than Lin Li. Even amongst master-level magewefts, the conquering magewef stood out the most. In Anril today, the conquering magewef might not be necessarily recognized by anyone, though. Even though Lin Li had also mastered the art of drawing magewefts, he had never dared to think of drawing such a huge conquering magewef in a city. The required materials alone included the blood of hundreds of WYRMs. Indeed, only a lunatic could design such a marvelous city, but he would definitely be a genius with a lot of imagination. When a conquering magewef was enlarged by many times, it meant that all residents in the entire city could be integrated at any time and possess godly powers. If all the sky castles in the world were designed in such an impressive manner, it would be impossible to imagine how Juresco and the rest managed to destroy those sky castles back then. Lin Li had once been amazed by the eternal furnace designed by Osric and shocked by the throne of darkness, created by the dragon of destruction. After Kanoris proposed to fuse the throne of darkness and the eternal furnace, he once thought that his mighty power might not be inferior to the Sky Castle, though it might not exactly be equal. However, now that he was truly standing in a Sky Castle, he realized how childish and ridiculous his previous mindset was. Although the High Elves had already disappeared from the Sky Castle now, Lin Li could totally imagine how majestic of a view it would be when someone invaded the Sky Castle and they activated the conquering mage, allowing the ordinary High Elves to suddenly possess power greater than the deities. However, while Lin Li was marveling over the power of the Sky Castle, he also gained a new understanding of Juresco's abilities. The title of the God of Mages was not just given to Juresco out of the mage's respect for his contribution to development of magic. Although he was not alone, he definitely was godly, be it the conquering mage which had infinite power or the deadly designs on both sides of the buildings. Lin Li had seen more than just those. He had every reason to believe that there must have been more deadly traps where he couldn't see them. Therefore, he still walked down the street even though he could already fly past those buildings as a legendary mage. Despite having taken a lot of detours, Lin Li finally arrived at the center of the Sky Castle. In the middle of the spacious square lay the control hub of the entire Sky Castle. Compared to the tower in the middle of the Sky Castle, the Tower of Dusk was just like a toy. Even the materials used to build the Tower of Dusk that Lin Li was rather proud of seemed to be incomparable despite being gold and adobe. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.